Hey everyone, welcome to Behind the Minds with Jordan Brooks, Tyler Simmons, and myself, Robbie Crouse. Today's episode is about what it's like to be a black volleyball player in Nova Scotia. I'm going to be interviewing Tyler and Jordan. You hear some of their stories, some of their experiences. If you haven't checked out the other podcasts, feel free. One's on culture. Yeah, one's on culture, one's on NBA team, one gets to know ourselves. Today's going to be a lot of stories. We're going to tell names and stuff like that and just what their experience was like. It should be a good topic.
I'm excited.
Ty, did you want to start off with maybe just like a little thing, then we'll go through some questions?
As in like a background?
Yeah.
Okay, well, for those of you who know, I'm from North Preston, which is the largest all-black community in Canada. We've been in North Preston for about 400 years. All of my ancestors lived in North Preston. If you ask me where I'm from, it's North Preston, Nova Scotia, and that's all we know. We come from the Black Loyalists who would have fought in the war and were given free land in Nova Scotia after the war was over. We're the Jamaican Maroons. There's the earpiece touch there.
You caught it.
And also we are the runaway slaves from the Underground Railroad that made their way into Nova Scotia. So there's a lot of history of black people in Nova Scotia. And if you're not from Nova Scotia, you might not know that. You think that we're just black people, I guess, but we've been here. There's actually t-shirts that say that we've been here before Canada was even established as a country.
152 years or whatever.
Yeah, Nova Scotia would exist.
Because as soon as you go like to New Brunswick or PEI or anywhere else, like people don't know about these communities and how long they've been here.
Yeah.
Jordan, do you want to give us a little background on?
Yeah. So I'm half black, half white. My father's actually from the sister community to Tyler's. It's East Preston, Nova Scotia. And over the years, it's kind of, I think, it seems like they're trying to sort of shrink it a little bit, and they seem to, like, Lake Echo is a community that's right beside East Preston, and it seems like every year you go back and Lake Echo seems to be stretched a little deeper in. But once upon a time, the community actually, like between Cherrybrook, Lake Loon, East Preston, North Preston, I'm pretty sure they all actually just went as Preston. That was what they used to call it. So my father was born there and spent the first probably 12 years of his life there. And I've definitely done my best to do my research on, my background, and because it's very interesting. And, when I moved to New Brunswick, which is a country or a province that really there's not too many black people there. And they, people didn't really.
They're all first generation, they're second.
Yeah, like, they'll meet me and they'll just assume that, my parents, my dad or my grandparents came over from Africa like 50 years ago. And you know what I mean? Because in New Brunswick, realistically, that's what you see. Most of the black people in New Brunswick haven't been there any longer than 50 to 100 years, whereas, our communities have been there for so long. And, I take pride in kind of educating people. When I was in my education program last year, I made sure to do a lot of my presentations. If I had the opportunity, I would incorporate those communities in there because I think it's very important for people to know that. And I think in New Brunswick, the closest thing they had was the Indigenous community. It's a pretty big one over there. Like, there are a lot of reserves there. And, I had a chance to teach some of those students, and I felt like they kind of, it's a different situation, definitely. But that was the closest thing I felt to what the Preston community was like in terms of in New Brunswick. So for anyone from New Brunswick, if you ever were to go to one of the reserves, or if you've ever seen one of the reserves, that's kind of what you should picture when you're picturing the Preston community. Very close knit. The last names are all, there's about 20 last names that everybody has. Just about everyone's related. There's marriages between the different families, and and honestly, they're some of the nicest people you'll ever meet in your life. So that's just another thing I'd mention.
Yeah, that's a good point. So we have a couple questions here about just the community in Nova Scotia, the black volleyball community, we'll call it. Who were players that when you guys first saw, you guys were like, oh, I can do this. I want to be like this guy.
So I'll go first. My older brother Calvin played volleyball, so I went to all of his games. I watched him play since junior high, and at Grand Creighton, the junior high he went to, there was a few black people that played with them. So there's Christian Williams, who I think played Canada Games for Nova Scotia. There's Gary Gray, who played at Auburn with him. Ryan Williams. There's a couple out there, but I can't remember. But then, like, my brother was one, and then I also got to play volleyball in my community, and I got to see some of the old legends. Like my oldest brother, Ricardo, he would have played for Cole Harbour High, which is a school in Dartmouth too. He was someone I kind of looked up to playing volleyball, and then
they had a dynasty there, did they? Did
Yeah.
they not?
Yeah.
And Howie Jackson was the coach.
Was the coach.
Yeah.
At PA when he switched over.
Yeah.
Jordan, how about you? Who were some people that, or a player, or maybe two players who you saw that was like, man, this could be me?
Yeah. To be honest with you, Calvin Simmons would be one. And that was kind of the surprise I saved for the episode. I remember when we were just kids. I don't know how old we were, Tyler, but your brother showed up to a club tournament and he had a suit on. He had a suit on. And Cuz was wearing a suit, and he was getting up and banging balls, all these dress clothes. And I remember thinking to myself, like, man, like I want to be, he could really get off the floor.
Yeah,
And
he could fly.
and I was
had
like,
bounce.
he did, and like he was an older guy too, so hanging around with all us young fellas, just whooping us. And to me, I was kind of like, man, like I want to be this guy. Like he's in dress shoes and all that stuff, and he's still killing us. And I knew Tyler then, like that was kind of when we started to compete against each other enough that we probably had a relationship at that point. But I remember thinking he was super lucky to have Calvin as an older brother. I was jealous. And honestly, other than that, just one thing that really kind of gave me a big boost was the Pac-Man volleyball team. So when they first started, and I was in Moncton for the 16U Easterns, they called it. So it would be Ontario over like nationals. Yeah. And I remember just seeing their 15U and 16U team. 16U team had guys like Terrell Bromwell. He was their best player. They had a guy named Jordan Langley. It was like 6 or 7 black guys.
Yeah.
And they had a.
Do you guys remember their meter ball warm up?
Oh man,
that was on YouTube, and it was just them crushing meter balls.
that was at 18U in Ottawa. So
I
actually got a chance to see them 2 or 3 years before they kind of like. At this tournament, the Pac-Man was a new club, and they also, like, they weren't – that was the beginning of them dominating. And I remember just seeing all these brothers there, and I'm like, man, like, the girls were loving them. They were so athletic, and I was like, man, like, I want to be – like. I do take that moment as when I really wanted to be the best volleyball player I could be.
I see that. I probably would have taken a change there, too.
Yeah.
I was heavy in soccer, but then once I saw them, I'm like, you know what? I could.
You wanted to be that.
Yeah.
100%. I looked up, and I looked up to Terrell as as an athlete who because he had the basketball talent, and he still chose our sport, and I was very, very happy about that. And so that would be my two. And then having a lot of the officials and stuff. I'm sure we'll talk about them, but we weren't alone, Tyler. We were
shout out Jamie and Justin too.
Yeah. Amen.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with that.
Going on with that story about Tyrell, it's like when we played in that U20 NTCC tournament, and it's like there's 4 black guys at the tournament, and me and you are the 16-year-olds, like the youngest ones in the tournament, and he walks over and like talks to us. Like I'm not like fanboying him or anything like that, but it's a big moment.
We were excited.
Yeah.
He could have talked to anybody else, but just like nope. The only
him
2
and
black
David,
guys who play for Nova Scotia.
Yeah.
And him and David were kind of the guys we were hoping to be 4 years down the road, and we never got the opportunity. But like it gave us people. It was cool to have those guys we looked up to, give us the time of day. So
yeah. So now we'll kind of talk about that officials and coaching community. We'll kind of name drop, tell stories about. Some of them. So I wrote a few down who I didn't want to leave anyone out, mind you. So we could go around. And now Jordan's father is a huge like volleyball icon in say Atlantic, Canada. People know him in every gym.
Yeah.
So he's someone who's in that group.
8-time ACAA winner.
Yeah,
10 years.
Yeah, started the Sonics Club in 2000.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't realize our club's been around for 20 years.
Yeah, that's
a long
wild,
time.
Eh?
Yeah,
I remember
it's one of the oldest clubs
ones that had you guys had tracksuits in U16.
Yeah, they were sweatsuits, but
the green ones.
I landscaped in those.
Yeah.
That's my dirty clothes.
I'm glad we changed the colors, but we'll get into that story about us coaching later. But and other people would be like Howie, who we mentioned.
Brad Barton.
So we'll tell a little blurb about each of them.
Yeah.
I'll start talking about your dad.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time coaching wise with him.
Yeah, for sure.
Without Derek, I wouldn't be coaching volleyball. My earpiece gonna fall.
I can honestly say without Derek, I wouldn't be coaching either.
No, I'm the same.
Yeah. I was playing soccer at the Mount, and I walked into the gym to say hi to him, and he tells all the girls, "Hey, this is my son Tyler." And all the girls like, "That's not Jordan. We know Jordan." And ever since then, he asked me to help him coach the volleyball team. I'll still go places, and people are like, "Hey, Derek, why is your son your assistant coach?" I'm like, "I'm not his son. I'm from East Preston. Like, I'm from North Preston, the other side." But I don't think I was like, he's a role model, like someone who I see coaching who looks like me, and like I can continue to coach because of that, because representation is important, right?
Yeah.
So 100%. That's something that we get a lot of.
Yeah. Jordan, did you want to touch on Howie Jackson a bit?
Yeah, no, and just to add on that, like, I'm the
Derek,
same. With Dad, I mean, growing up, I saw his passion for the game and for helping youth. At times it was tough for our family because it meant so much to him to do that and to give back. And I'm sure for my mom, it was very difficult, but she told me a story about Dad that when he coached at Auburn, which a lot of people don't. Tyler, you knew he did, but a lot of people a lot of people don't. And there was a girl, her name was Megan Young. She went to the NCAA for whip pitch, I think. Yeah. And she was a fantastic athlete. Could have. And Lori Beth from Holland.
Oh yeah.
She played at Acadia. She played for Auburn. For Dad at Auburn. But anyway, on that team, this Megan Young girl, her parents drove by our house when I was little, and they had all these gifts, and they were thanking Dad before they drove to the States. They actually stopped in on their way. And her parents were crying, and she was crying, and my mom started to cry. And she's like, "I hated that your father gave all that time, but that was a moment." Like she's told me this story many times, that was where she realized how much he was doing for these kids and how much he meant in their lives. And she said she could never ever make him stop after she experienced that. So that's just one thing I'd say to him and on him. And it kind of made me get to that point where it was like, I've got 3 provincial championships, which I love to remind people of, but do I have those championships without my father? No. Does Pete Halley have those championships without my father? He doesn't. And Pete would be the first one to tell you that. It was a team effort. I think he took pride in making sure that Justin and I had a good volleyball experience. He forced our friends that played football and stuff to come out, even though they didn't want to play volleyball, but no one's going to tell the man no. So,
he doesn't take no well either.
No, he doesn't. And as for Mr. Jackson, and I have to call him Mr. Jackson.
On D. Brooks?
Oh, yeah. Sorry, you go ahead.
Yeah, I wouldn't be in coaching if it wasn't for Derek. First time he got me to come help out, I left because of the other coach. And then he got me to do like the webcast, the commentating for that. And then got in club, and like even like we have a write-up in the Mount A like handbook this year that you get for the games, and I showed him out because he's a huge part of why I'm coaching, and just one of those role models who I've
100%. Oh yeah, like we're all doing what we're doing because of the man, and there's other people that are that are a part of that process.
Oh,
but
for sure.
He definitely gets the biggest percentage from me for sure. On Mr. Jackson, if we want to talk, I'll start. I know we've all had experiences with him, but he actually worked at Auburn while my father was there. He was the phys ed teacher, I want to say. And so as a young kid, I would see him both at volleyball as an official and when I'd go to take your kid to work day. And he was all about respect. And I remember him talking to me about like,
so hard.
he'd shake your hand hard. I remember the first time I shook his hand, and I didn't look him in the eyes. He didn't let me go. And he goes, "You look people in the eye and you show them respect when you shake their hand." He said, "As a young black man, you need to do your part to, help people understand." And it scared me. I was actually quite upset about it, but it's something I've never forgotten. And every time I shake someone's hand, I actually judge the other person on whether they look at me. And I'm like, Mr. Jackson would not be feeling that one. You know what I mean? And he was such a well-respected person, official. And I mean, what he's done for the black community is, between him and Mr. Barton, it's mind-blowing. But just to go on what I was saying about Mr. Jackson, it was just someone. He was a teacher. He was an official. He was a coach. He was everything I really, even though I didn't know back then, he's everything I wanted to be before I even knew I wanted to be them, right? So that's the impact he had on my life. And
he was an international ref.
Yeah, one of two.
Yeah.
And they're both African Nova Scotian, actually.
Yeah.
Now, so.
And we'll get into Mr. Brad Barton next, or did you want to talk? Want to talk about
Howie? Like because he got to coach my oldest brother, and then he was, I'm pretty sure, like the head of volleyball in Nova Scotia when we were going through. And I just remember him always comparing me to my brother, saying that like I was way more technical than what he is. It was like my brother was so much more aggressive than what I was. And he's just like, "Tyler, stop tipping the ball. Hit the ball. You don't need a tip. You don't need a roll shot. Hit the ball. Swing at the hands." I'm like, I couldn't compete with my brother, but like this was a guy that when he told you something, you listened.
Yeah.
Didn't you?
He told me to hit the ball as hard as I could. I'm gonna swing at the back wall 5 times. And he once told me that like if he had a son, that he'd want his son to be like me. And I remember when I found out he died, I was actually on the Mounts bus with the volleyball team heading to a game. And I just remember like bawling my eyes in the back of the bus by myself, because not everyone gets to have a relationship with these guys, but like with me and you, Jordan, there's a special bond that they
100%.
see us. They see us, and there's this like extra connection, and they kind of watch out for you a little bit. And
they're hoping that we're going to be, kind of fill in their shoes when the time comes, right?
And try to build the sport back up in our communities, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, no, that's a good story. And I haven't really, my paths didn't cross with Howie that much because he was in churro at this point, but he wasn't involved with volleyball. I researched all the stuff about him and heard you guys talk all these stories about him.
One thing to add, he still has the triple jump provincial record in Nova Scotia from like 1960. No one's beaten it yet. He loved to remind me of it, and I check every year track happens. I'm like, did anyone get him?
Trying to see if that record still stands.
Man, he beats the current people by like quite the distance. So he was obviously quite the athlete himself.
Yeah. Do you guys think it was very important to have these older coaches look out for you and help, and have someone that if you needed information you could ask? Or
well, it's just good to know that there's actual like we could do it.
Yeah.
Like, you see them doing it, and you're like, I could actually be a good coach.
Yeah, well, that's what they say about a lot of things. Being someone who's black, a lot of times what's hard for the young, the youth, especially in the Preston communities, is they're not seeing someone that's from there that looks like them doing what they want to do, so they get in their head that it's not possible. Whereas for us, Tyler and I had, Anthony Pleasant. I called him Mr. Pleasant, but I'll say his first name for that. Him, Mr. Fairfax, David Fairfax. We had, Mr. Barton, Mr. Jackson, my father, all these men who were so well established. So it was like, we can do this, no problem. You know what I mean?
Funny story about that. I went and did a soccer camp not in North Preston, but at Cherry Brook. And all the kids went up like, this is a professional coach that came from somewhere else. I'm like, no, I'm from North Preston. But they thought because I coach soccer that it's
impossible.
Different. Yeah. And they're like, no, I'm from here.
Yeah. We'll touch on Mr. Brad Barton here now. I kind of had this. I was talking to him. He was reffing one of our games this year at Kings, and I just kind of asked him like how the game has evolved. He'd be a great person to sit down and like just talk about volleyball, because he's seen it for so long from so
he's reffed the Olympics.
Yeah, so many different angles, and he's just one of those guys that as soon as you meet him, he talks to them, and you realize Man, warm-up's almost over. I've spent
Yeah.
60 minutes talking to this
You
ref.
just want to pick his brain.
Oh, 100%, because he's seen
Yeah.
the game from so many angles, and he's just that legend, that OG.
Yeah.
You want to touch a bit on Mr.
Well,
Barton?
he's also an educator as well. I'm pretty sure
Yeah.
he taught Tyler's parents, and you can touch
he
on
was
that.
my
Yeah.
parents' teacher.
But he was a big part of, just black education, and that's something. It's funny that I only really learned later on in my life. Like, I just see this guy, I'm like, oh, he's just this sweet ref that's, African Nova Scotian, but he's so much more than that. What, when it comes to the Department of Education and African Nova Scotian Studies, just help, like, the amount of African Nova Scotians that have had him touch them in some way, like either through sport or through education. Between him and Mr. Jackson, you'd almost be able to not find someone who doesn't know or hasn't dealt with them. And according to my father, Mr. Barton is an international ref, and Dad said he was definitely one of the best referees in the world. He reffed the Olympics, and I think it's something that a lot of people, they'll get him now, and they see that.
He's slowing down a little bit now.
Well, and they see this special badge, right? Because he's got that different looking badge.
Yeah.
And then he'll get up there. I mean, he's in his 70s, I'm pretty sure. So, things are definitely going fast for him. And I'll tell my girls, I'll be like, not one word said to this man about any
Oh,
calls.
buddy. Yeah, I'll never say anything to Brad. If he can make the worst call every game, won't
What can you
anything,
say?
Just because, yeah. And he'd be a great person to sit down and discuss how volleyball's changed. I talked to him a bit about it too. He's like, I might have to do that. But,
oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Tyler, he did teach your parents, right?
Yeah, at Green Creighton when it was a high school.
Okay, nice.
Oh, yeah.
And I think my mom would have been playing volleyball at that time at the school.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if he coached her, but
it
probably would have helped my mom get into volleyball.
Yeah, for sure.
We'll touch a bit about Mr. Anthony Pleasant now. Yeah, see, I'm used to calling them all by the first names. But
Ty, you go ahead if you want. Maybe we can talk about him and Mr. Fairfax kind of as one. Yeah, because they're both pretty similar.
Well, for me, I've seen them as refs mainly.
Mm-hmm.
Like growing up, I had Mr. Fairfax as a ref quite often.
Yeah.
And whenever you see them, you're trying to impress them as a player.
Yeah.
Ref, I gotta show.
And they're
I'm representing.
Too. And they're hard on us.
Ever, every volley double hit, anything. But they're just guys that you want to impress. You see Mr. Pleasant, you see Mr. Fairfax, you're like, I need to show them that I'm a good
capable
volleyball player, or that I know volleyball, or that I can coach, or that I could be a good ref.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, if they were to step down from their roles, that we could pick it up and keep the legacy going,
Yeah. For me, honestly, one thing I'm going to mention about those two is that they're both very successful outside of volleyball. So, Mr. Fairfax is an RCMP officer, and I'm sure when he joined the RCMP, there were probably very few minorities in that organization. So that's one thing I'll mention. And then Mr. Pleasant works for the town of Yarmouth and has a very, he's got a great job. So they're also, not only are they volleyball role models for us, but they're successful men, black men that, who also do all this. They volunteer, they referee, they also, and they have successful careers. So not only were they volleyball role models.
It's important to see that.
Yeah.
And the same goes for Mr. Jackson and Mr. Barton. They're both educators. So these are also men, and Dad's worked with a ton of youth. They're people who just have touched on so many different lives in so many different ways. For me, with Mr. Pleasant and Mr. Fairfax, those are guys who people don't know, but Mr. Pleasant, his teams were the best. When I was a kid, and I used to go out when Dad first started Sonics. I remember the first year they had white T-shirts with black numbers on them, just 6 and then 6 on the backs, plain as could be. And Sackville had some decent up and coming players, but Yarmouth, they were called, they had Blue Devils, the Yarmouth Blue Devils. And I'll tell you right now, you weren't touching them. Back then, it was them and CEC and them and Hub Club used to be the club in Truro.
That
would
have been
Mr.
Carrie
Pierce's
Smith
club. Yeah, she would have played for them, but even before that. So it was the Yarmouth Truro show. Cape Breton had some good teams, but I mean, Mr. Pleasant's he's won an NSSAF division title with Ariel Smith, who's another person who I'm going to talk about. Black, someone I looked up to.
Dominant.
Dominant.
I remember I went to a camp in Yarmouth, and I asked her, I was like, how can I be as good as you? And I remember she said something about me. She said, I got too many extra movements, she said, with my approach. And she wasn't wrong. But this is a girl who I'm like, man, this, like, when we did the camp, it was like boys and girls, but she came over on the boys' side and was whooping us. And I mean, she had an incredible career at SMU. I think she played basketball at one point in there. So that's another name. Yeah, maybe at Acadia or U of C. I don't know. Anyway, Ariel Smith was another one. I'm glad I was reminded of that. But another person is Don Barry, who's another guy who's actually from Dartmouth. And his daughters, Erica Barry, Alyssa Barry, who I'm sure every volleyball player in Nova Scotia had a crush on at one point.
Oh yeah.
And you know what I mean? Like there's so many people. You guys know what I'm saying. And but like these guys, like, you know, it's funny because they're such role models to us. But then now, you know, when we see them, they look at us as equals, right? Like they look at us like, you guys have made it. You know, we were hard on you as young men, but you've learned, right? So those guys, man, you know, without all of them, where would we be? There wouldn't be black coaches.
No. I think even that the St. Anne's camp or the camp that Mr. Pleasant runs now, I think that it's just great. Not a celebration, but it just brings people together.
That's super black staff.
Yeah, there's 5 black coaches.
All together. No. And it's a very fun, and the kids love it. They have to turn athletes down for that camp. Yeah. Right?
And so Jeremy McKinnon might be helping out, joining the staff next year.
I actually saw that.
So, you know, it's just good to have that positive, like, group of people that other people can see. And,
one person I'm going to mention, and you know what? This is going to be a big one, is Michelle O'Coin. And when it comes to African Nova Scotians, or, you know, the black volleyball community, she's someone who, for one, when I write about my coaching career, that woman she's why I really went with coaching. Like, you know, my father did it and all these other people, but she was the first person to say to me, you can do this. Because I went to tryouts at provincial team, and I was just supposed to help pick the team. And then she's like, I think you'd be great if you want to help out. And I'm like, I'll help out, okay. Then I get there, and she's like, take your own team. And I'm like, I was so nervous, but she's like, Jordan, believe me, you can do this. And not only was she a big part of that for me, she also, you know, she went to Dartmouth High, and I know that she won some championships while she was there, but she actually stopped, you know, she started like youth programs and different things to try and, you know, help the black community in terms of getting volleyball bigger. From what I understand, I don't know the whole story.
Yeah. She was trying to run a program in North Preston, I'm pretty sure. It didn't catch on.
No, and that's going to be a team. It's going to be a team effort, I think. That's going to take a lot of people. But Michelle is someone
the whole Coin family is a great family, because I know her sister Katie coaches soccer too, and she was pretty big in the Dartmouth community in soccer.
Yeah, they're wicked people. And, you know, she was someone who really, you know, I was a 21-year-old black guy coaching these 15, 16-year-old girls, and, you know, I was a little nervous about it, and she trusted me, and she, you know, she helped me with so much, and she had so much faith in me. She didn't treat me any different than she treated the other coaches. And you know, I wrote about Michelle in my application to get into education about how much she did for me. So that's just a name I felt I should mention when it comes to the black community, because I think a lot.
Another one that we've kind of, I haven't left off, but we haven't really touched on yet, and probably one of the most recognizable people at this point, Courtney Baker.
No,
she's a role model for people who might play other sports, and they see this young female who's, you know, oh, well, that could be me.
As weird as it sounds, I tell my girlfriend that if we ever have a daughter, I want her to be Courtney Baker, because she's nice, she's athletic, she's a great volleyball player, like.
Stud.
Oh, Courtney's she's a fantastic individual. You know, it's funny because that summer I'm talking about, Courtney was actually on that provincial
team. That's what
team.
reminded me of it.
Yeah, and she was this cute little kid, long as ever. Gee, because she didn't have that muscle back then. But she was so nice. She's so modest. Like, that girl's a CIS Player of the Year. You talk to her, and she'll still blush when you give her a compliment. You know what I mean? And like, I do think. And you know what? The thing about Courtney is she's an inspiration not only to a black athlete, but to every volleyball player that's
100%. And that's why I said the most recognizable
easy.
at this point.
Courtney she's a huge part of that for sure. And one of the most successful athletes that our province has seen.
Yeah.
Hence why they should have more black volleyball players.
I know. Maybe some more Courtneys come out. We'll have some more championships. Who knows?
Yeah. Some of you may wonder why we're all matching. We're all repping this. It's one of the teams that we coached, and this team is called Sonics Black. So one of our close friends, Haley McDonald, God love her, she pulled me aside and she was like, "Do you want to be called like Sonics Blue?" Meanwhile, we had black jerseys and they had blue jerseys. Sonics Blue or Sonics Brooks? I was like, "No, we'll be Sonics Black." Mm-hmm. And then I was like, "I'll ask." And I was like, "What do you guys want to be, like our team name to be?" And both you guys at the exact same time look at it, go, "Sonics Black."
Yeah.
So yeah, we figured
all day.
Yeah.
All day.
So we figured we'd all rep the same hoodie, just for this episode. So if there's any wondering why we're all matching.
It was also, I can say for me as a volleyball coach, that team was probably, and I don't want to talk bad about some other ones, but it was some of the most fun I've ever had as a coach. And I think for us it was. We got a group of kids that we'd never coached, and we got really close with that group. We've remained close with that group.
Still talk to them now.
Yeah, it was a talented group. We had to play against an incredible, some incredible athletes in the Tigers team, and then the Bedford team that we played, and even Renee Cleveland just carrying that Fusion team as well.
Dominated.
So I think for us, this team. This team really it holds dear to us, and we had Ann Dan as well as our manager.
And this was the first year of the rebrand too, so it kind of like rebranded us as this is the image of our coaching staff, what we represent, how we carried ourselves, and I think that's important for like other people who are interested in playing for us as coaches.
And I think that team bought into the culture, the most that we've probably ever had. That was a really, we had good team culture with that team. And, those girls were like, anything we said, it was just, they trusted us and they went with it. And, they made us look good in the end. I'm thankful for that group of girls because we look like better coaches because of how well they performed. So.
Yeah. So, no, that's just broke down the Sonics Black sweater look today. So, we have a few more questions left. We're going to get some stories at the end. But what's one of the most annoying questions you guys as black volleyball players you most commonly get asked? Either one can start.
Okay,
you go ahead, Ty.
I don't know if I'm going to steal this one from you, but I had two. The first one was, why don't you play basketball? Everyone asked, oh, you can jump so high. Why don't you play basketball? I was like playing volleyball? Everyone assumes that because you're black that you have to play basketball, and it's not the case. My dad told me stories about him growing up. Hockey was the sport in North Preston.
It was.
You're either a Montreal Canadiens fan or the fans of the best team in the NHL, and that's the Maple Leafs.
Yeah.
Right. So it's one or the other.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel you. For me, it was pretty similar. People. It's funny because sometimes people would just tell me, they wouldn't even ask. There's been times I'd be working out at the gym training for volleyball and doing the agility ladder, and like, oh, you must be a basketball player, and I'm just like, I used to play, so, and I'm not even gonna get into it with people, so I'd be like, yeah, and I just kind of, just shake it off, but it's definitely something that I'm sure, Tyler, you've probably been asked that 50 to 100 times.
I had it at the Mount. The Raymond used to practice at the Mount, right? And I was just going there to work out, and this old man and lady walked up to me and like, do you play for the Raymond? I'm like, first of all, I'm 6'2". I'm not 6'9".
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not a basketball player. You get asked all the time, why don't you play basketball?
But Ty has a very interesting plot about a guy that tries out for a basketball team, gets cut, plays volleyball,
why hasn't there been a volleyball movie, like a great volleyball movie? Like,
That's true.
Gets cut from a basketball team, shows
Makes
up
the
to
switch.
the girls walking through the gym.
I got cut in
Introduced
grade
to
7
volleyball.
from the basketball team. Then I was like, oh, these girls are trying out for volleyball. I may as well try.
It's the perfect
Yeah, it's true.
plot for a movie. And
It
like,
is.
like, and then he could be jumping, and that could also like invite people to try volleyball out. Like, there needs to be
Trying to make it the new wave of But yeah. So anyway, we'll get. Well, I have a few more questions.
Yeah.
Now, as like young black men coaching females, what are tips or advice you'd give other people that are trying to get into it, or that you've had to do yourself?
Okay. For me, it's just don't get disappointed if people may not. One thing I've learned with being a young black male, helping youth female in sport is it's the same as if you're just a young white male or a young Hispanic male. Like, you're a male coaching young girls. So don't take it to heart when people are a little, I wouldn't even say skeptical or,
Hesitant.
They're a little hesitant to have you as their daughter's coach because, they have the right to be. And if we had daughters ourselves, I think we'd be the same. So my big thing would be to not get disappointed or be offended by that, because really it has nothing to do with the fact, and it could, that could add to the suspicion or whatever, but at the end of the day, we're in our 20s, and these girls aren't even 10 years younger than us for the most part, and these parents are trusting us with their kids. So just prove yourself. Like, the way I look at it with this is that with every parents meeting that I'll host, the parents are obviously a little bit skeptical, or it'd be the case for any new coach that they've never dealt with before. Is they want to see, who is this that I'm leaving for 4 to 5 months, my daughter with. So for me, it's a big thing is that I don't take anything to heart. The judgment or the I guess the skepticism, I take it on as kind of a goal to prove to these parents, like, these kids are in fantastic hands, and we're gonna, we care just about your girls, is maybe not just as much, but we care about these kids and we want to see them have success. So my advice would just don't let things bother you. You have to prove yourself, and once you've done that, you're gonna have to prove yourself again the next year. It's not gonna it's not gonna ever end, but it's just something that has to happen.
What I've always taken note on this subject is how the parents act at the first of the year versus the end of the year, and then it's completely different. You're running them soapies, like, oh, like that. It's just like that bond that you have to trust in yourself, that what, everybody might they'll come around, but whether it's right away, a little longer. But yeah, and also to touch on when Jordan and I took a team to Bermuda, there was, how many people went? 10?
11 girls, 12 parents, and ourselves.
Yeah, and ourselves. So anyway, we all wore our Sonic stuff. The girls went in, and Buddy at Customs, he was like, "Well, you guys here?" And we're like, "Oh, we're here for a volleyball tournament." And he's like looking around. He's like, "There's only 2 of you guys." And we're like, "Man, we're their coaches." Like,
he didn't believe it.
No, he didn't know. And like, we both had like matching shirts. Yeah. And but yeah, he was even a little skeptical himself.
He was,
Tyler, would you like to throw your input on this?
For coaching young girls, first of all, you have to draw the line, and draw the line early. I had the opportunity of coaching them out when I was 18 or 19, and the girls were 5 years older than me.
Yeah.
Like, some of them were 5 years older than me. So like, you have to know that there's a line that can't be crossed, and everyone has to be aware of what that line is. Now, for being a young black male coaching players, for me, like, in the beginning, I'm overly nice, because some of the times for these girls, it's their first experience with a black, like, talking to a black guy. So they only know what they see on TV. And like, you have to get them to buy into, like, I'm actually a nice person. You don't need to be scared of me. Like, every black person's different, right? And then as the season progresses, that's when they find out, like, I'm nice, but I'm also strict.
Yeah.
Like, as the season goes on, it's like, do as I say, like.
So that's why I'm always the hard ass right out of the gate.
Yeah. You're the nice in the beginning.
Yeah.
And I think too, like, one thing, is that, like, as time goes, our love for these kids, like, they mean the world to us. And I think the biggest thing is once the parents get a grasp on that and they see, like, holy crap, like, these guys would die for our kids. That's kind of I find that's the hump you have to get over. Maybe I'm on my own there. But and it's funny because these parents, the same parents that are skeptical or unsure about us being these kids' coaches as young males and us as young black males are the ones that we're still in touch with and that we're we're hugging when we see.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so
like sometimes it's good to even like coach these girls and tell them about our community. Like half the time, the only time they hear about them is like when there's a shooting in the newspaper or something like that.
The negative media.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a benefit to have positive like information spread to people who only read stuff on the news or on Twitter.
And we give them good advice when it comes to the boys, parents. We tell them stay away.
Yeah.
We also do that.
And they have to meet us. All the boyfriends need to meet us.
Oh yeah. That's one of my favorite parts.
You got to give me the Howie Jackson handshake, or you're not on my
guy.
No. See you later.
No. And and if like they don't bring them up and introduce right away, you're heckling them. Hey, who's that? Yeah.
Amen.
I still do that with the girls at Mount A. Hey, who's that guy? You got to bring him over and introduce me.
Amen.
I'll call him out right in the hall. So
it's respect.
And that's just exactly, yeah. So, we're going to talk a bit about some of the GOAT NS black volleyball players. We'll throw some names around, just people who have impacted the sport and in a great deal. I'm gonna throw you two on there because you won't throw yourselves, but as being icons in the sport and people coming to watch and being that person that they can, he resembles me. That's someone that I can get into volleyball. Like, I'll start him off with you two. But, Justin. Shout out Justin.
It's appreciated. I'll tell him we shouted him out.
Yeah. Oh yeah. We're gonna have Justin on too, because like I don't know how many people in the ACAA have won Rookie of the Year and MVP in the same season.
None.
Yeah. So, and I'm sure he has stories to tell about the same experiences you guys have had, but.
Oh, for sure.
I think we were some of the lucky few because with you got to play with your brother. Like you have one black teammate that you got to play with, and actually you got a couple of them at Sackville.
Yeah, we had 4 or 5 every year. Yeah.
And then like when I played at Graham Creighton, I had a couple like tried to introduce some of my friends. One of my best friends at the time, KJ.
He was a beast. He was a beast. He was nice.
But then as the later you go in, it becomes a lonely place where it's like you never have another black player on your team.
So that's why it's important to have those role models and coaches that if like you need help or it's someone to bounce.
And I think, Jordan, that's why we kind of gravitated to each other when we were younger.
100%. Yeah.
Like, oh, you're black. I'm black. Oh, I know your dad. Your dad knows my mom. Hey, we should be friends.
Yeah.
And let's start a beach volleyball team. Let's play together.
Yeah.
Team black.
Yeah. And it's nice to have someone with you too, like that's going through what you're going through as well. Like, that's feeling what you're feeling. And I think you don't feel alone when you have that as well. So
yeah, for sure. So any other names you guys want to throw out there?
I know one that comes to mind is Dwayne Provo. We talked about him before we actually recorded. Just a young individual. He's from North Preston. He did run for a political party at one point, Tyler. Am I correct?
Yeah, I think it was NDP. I can't remember.
Yeah, and he's someone who actually went to the CFL. And so Dwayne Provo's story is crazy because he was a volleyball guy.
For Dow.
Yeah. He went to Dow and played volleyball, and then he switched to SMU for whatever reason. And according to my dad, he actually just tried out for football and turned into one of their best players. And went on to go to the CFL. And, I've met
That's
Dwayne,
fun.
and he's a super nice guy. Apparently he could fly.
Rob Adams was telling me stories about Dwayne.
Yeah. So, and Dwayne, just like Mr. Barton, just like Mr. Pleasant, just like Mr. Fairfax, all the names we mentioned, he's a successful black man who's not only an athlete we can look up to, but he's also just in his community. So that's one name that comes to my mind.
I keep saying the guy's name, Christian Williams. Like, the guy had the best hands I've ever seen in a setter. And
I've heard a lot of good things.
Yeah, he could do it. He could do it all. Like, he could have gone far with it. I think he was a little bit undersized to play at the next level, but he was the man. Like,
also too, being from Sackville, just the black guy that I'd heard of growing up was Chris Shepard, who, some of our older, I shouldn't say older because really not that old, but maybe our late 30s beyond viewers would know who he is. And he's a guy who, he went to Sackville High, and he actually had a scholarship to the University of Winnipeg or Manitoba. And it wasn't for him, from what I've heard, and he came back after a year, but he had national team looks, and he was playing in the Can West, which is the best division in our sport. And Chris was someone who, when I was doing good things at Sackville High, thinking I was all that, my dad would always remind me that, like, you're not as good as Chris. He always would tell me that and remind me how great Chris was. So that would be something that someone who I would definitely have to bring up, especially being from Sackville. He was also a multi-sport athlete. He played baseball. He played all kinds of sports. So he's another name that I'd have to say. Just, someone who I wanted to be better than. And I've got more banners, but apparently he contributed more to his banner from what I've been told. So, yeah.
One other thing we're going to talk about, we touched on Howie Jackson and Brad Barton, but they also have huge scholarships.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys want to break down some of the requirements if you know them about the scholarships? Or
I think for Howie Jackson, you have to be an official or a player.
You have to be one of. So with the Mr. Jackson scholarship, it's something that they open up, and I actually shared it with Talia's sister, Kat Vidican. I told her because she's been reffing like crazy. And I told her
she was actually one of the linesmen at my first ACAA game I coached.
Was she?
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Next
God
player.
Bless Kat. Probably the easiest kid to coach you've ever coached.
Yeah,
and her sister's a sweetheart too, but they're complete opposites for sure. But no, with Mr. Jackson's scholarship, it's something you have to be still included in the game of volleyball. I think they don't. It's not limited to a player at post-secondary, but you need to be going to university, getting your education, and you need to still be involved in the game. And it's given out to, I want to say it's to a male and a female every year.
Yeah,
I think Justin's been a recipient before, so I'll have to confirm with him. Maybe we can even post a picture of the kind of the info for it. Because I honestly, when Justin applied, I'm almost positive he was the only male that did. And it's a shame because
not too many people do apply.
No, and that's the case for every scholarship.
And it's Howie Jackson. Half the young kids growing up now won't know who he is, but he's a legend.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's the scholarship that I think, people don't realize how much it means to the volleyball community, but if he's looking down on us right now, that's where he wants money to be going, right? So I think it's very important that we spread that word and we encourage kids. Like I sent the link to Kat because I was like, Kat, Kat is living the official life, and she's a fantastic official. So I think it's very important to let these kids know that that's out there and turn it into this one where rather than Justin getting it because he's the only male that applied, make it a competitive scholarship that it's hard to get, because really that's what it should be, because he meant that much to our sport. So
that's a great point. So now being from Nova Scotia and moving to New Brunswick to Fredericton, do you want to kind of tell us, I've heard this story, that's why I'm leading into it to do the intro, but D. Brooks, I know he pulled you aside and gave you a little lesson. Do you want to kind of get into that?
Yeah, for sure.
Or some tips. I wouldn't call it a lesson, but some tips.
It was a bit of
life
lesson.
Actually,
rest in peace to my Uncle Calvin, because he actually talked to me too. I was out in East Preston. He said, he's like, things are a little different out there.
Yeah.
And I didn't really get what he meant until I got there, and it was like New Brunswick it's definitely less diverse than Nova Scotia, just as a whole, not just blacks, but just in general.
Yeah.
And my dad kind of just warned me that as a black, as an African Canadian, I guess you could say, he's like, people aren't used to that out there, and they're not, it's don't take any of this stuff to heart if people aren't sure how to handle you, or aren't used to being around you. It's not really them discriminating against you per se, but just lack of knowledge and lack of kind of knowing. And the
it's
most
as simple
frustrating
as the nod.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
you go to Fredericton, you see a black guy walk past you, and you just give him a nice little nod, like "What's up?" And they give you a cold shoulder, and you're like, "What?"
So
and it's
for
nothing. It's just different culture. Like it's a different.
For those who don't know, if you're in Nova Scotia, like I remember I was walking to the sports stadium on Glendale, and there's this little 5-year-old kid, and you know how kids have to hold the rope, like when they're walking as a class, they all have to hold onto the rope. So there's this class, and this little black kid, I'm walking by, and he just gives me and I'm like, his parents raised him right. I'm thinking, you know what I mean? This is a 5-year-old.
In Nova Scotia, if you're black and you see another black person out, it's just like hey, what's up? I'm here.
Say hello.
Like,
we're happy to be here. You know what I mean? And in New Brunswick, it took me about 15 nods before, because the first few I'm like, oh, maybe their parents didn't teach them right or whatever. But you start to learn that it just doesn't exist. And I think that just goes back to the African Nova Scotian roots. Like, these guys don't understand it. And no, it was different for me. Not only being black.
It's just a change that you have to adapt to.
And also in the volleyball community, it's like, not only am I rare at just being black, I'm extra rare because of, the fact that I play our sport. And, there were positives to it. You're the only black guy at the club, and girls may notice you a little bit more, but there's also some stuff that you have to get used to. And I feel like you have to explain a lot of things to people that you don't think you should have to.
Yeah.
And you might get frustrated, but I think reminding yourself that it's not, some of these people aren't really even trying to offend you. They just aren't aware. And I think educating people on our Nova Scotia's history, I think that's the most important thing we could do. And Tyler, I've even learned from you, just since we become best friends, like some of the things you've taught me about our history that I didn't know, and now I'll be able to tell my children. And
you gotta talk.
Tyler stays teaching the history. Like in my notes, I have Thai heritage moment, like history lesson, because and it's great because some people from small town, or some people just don't know, and they only see stuff on Twitter or stuff on the news and assume. That's why I even think this episode, I'm glad we're doing it in episode 5. It would be nice to do it a little sooner, just so people are more aware, and it's a topic of like how strong the community is and how it's a tight knit.
Like, if I can cut in talking about a little history, like in the black communities in Nova Scotia, volleyball was a thing. Like
it was.
All of my mom's brothers and sisters played. All 8 of them played volleyball, and then my godmother played volleyball. Her sisters played volleyball. One went and played for Dal, actually, Sylvia Ewan. And, like, the families, everyone played volleyball, and hockey was a big one. And then basketball came in later because it was, like, the cheaper sport to play. Because all you needed was a pair of sneakers. And you could excel and play basketball, right? Because in the beginning, hockey was the sport. And then you have a guy like Wayne Simmons, a distant cousin of mine, who's playing in Evander Kane, playing in the NHL, right?
I remember going to Ty's house for the first time. His mom's like, "Yeah, this was Robbie. It's my friend from volleyball. Remember, buddy? She had a volleyball out in like 3 seconds. She was hitting as hard as she could. I was like, "Yeah, I'm just here, like hanging out."
I remember that. Yeah.
It's just it was huge in the community.
They were called. My mom's volleyball team was called the Soul Diggers.
Yeah,
so the
you know
Soul
what?
Diggers.
I have a cousin who played on a team called Big Up, and it was an all-black team, actually in Toronto. And I remember Dad used to tell me about them, and like Dad was so excited over there being this all-black volleyball team. And back when I was young, I didn't understand how much that meant, but it does. Like you're not going to see that, and I think that's why the Pac-Man was such an impressive thing for me. Was just see and ever since the Terrell Bromwells and those teams, like, every one of the Pac-Man teams
Even
tends to
Kofi
have.
Kid now.
Yeah, him, Ferrone, and there's a lot of guys. So
getting to coach some black kids, it's like you have a special bond with them. Like there's one on the mount right now. I'm like, her and I, there's this unwritten bond that we have that I look over. And then like even there's that girl on the SMU team. I forget her name.
Marielle Smith.
Yeah.
Oh, Mariama. She's a beast too.
But I had no reason to know her, but like we talked one day at like a tournament, and there's an instant connection because it's like, you're black, I'm black,
and she's the sweetest. She's the sweetest kid too. She's a really nice girl.
And it's just from I'm guessing from feeling alone at certain points, or like you're the only one, so that's why there's that gravitation or that connection.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I don't know about you. I didn't feel alone.
No, not at all. In New Brunswick, though, you would. In New Brunswick, you would, Tyler. That's the difference, right?
And the thing is like I'm from an all black community, so like I always felt like I was the only volleyball player.
Yeah.
But like it wasn't like I was the only one around. Like
you had this
you
had the support, but just it was different with volleyball. Whereas being someone from New Brunswick, it's a little bit of both, right? So it's different.
What were your encouraging words for UNB basketball coach Brent Baker on how to, kind of fix the program?
So Brent Baker, by the way, who's also he's a fantastic dude. He's a great coach.
He's a G. He's from Truro.
Yeah, he's from Truro. Yeah, he played for X. And I remember he came up to me. He's like, Brooksy, he's a jokey guy. Brooksy, what? Like they had a couple rough seasons in a row, and he's like, what do I got to do? He came up to me in T. And I was like, man, you don't got enough brothers. Like, this is basketball. And sure enough, Devon Masters comes in and just brother after brother. And now we got an AUS championship. That's all I got to say about that. So.
Switched up that Indiana style of basketball.
Amen. Reggie Miller changed them. They were mad. The Pacers were mad that he got drafted because there was a white guy from Indiana that they wanted them to take. And now they love Reggie Miller up there. Yeah. So... all it takes is one brother to show people that we got what it takes.
When I was in high school, I was trying to recruit the best of the best. I almost had Terry Thomas playing volleyball. For those of you who don't know, he's a St. FX, not legend, kind of.
Yeah.
He played played at Ottawa GGs, played for the Raymond, plays basketball, great basketball player, but I almost had him playing volleyball, and if I did, that's a guy, no one would touch him.
Oh.
You'd have him probably hitting the right side, me hitting the left side, no one would have stopped us.
No. If your high school got the athletes, it wouldn't have been a question.
No. My cousin Shaquille, left-handed, he played in junior high. When he came to high school, it was just all basketball.
Yeah. Well, I guess just to wrap things up.
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, if each of us want to just kind of, on everything we've talked about, if you want to kind of send one final message, Robbie, you want to start? Maybe because you've asked the questions.
Yeah. So, it was just my to ask questions, to help get the knowledge out, and help put info out to people who may not know. I think this is a very important topic, and I'm glad that we touched on it right away.
Ty?
Well, it's just good to know about other people's backgrounds, to kind of understand who they are, type of things. Even if it's not black and it's Aboriginal, I would like to learn more about other people's cultures and what they've gone through. Because as a coach, you have to know that type of stuff. You have to know about who the person is to be able to coach them.
Right? Well, I agree. Even to touch on that, there's a Truro Super Series, and we stayed in Truro for the night. And I had a car, and I'm from Stewiacke, which is close to Truro, so I took the girls I was with, who were from Bedford and the south end of Halifax, through Millbrook, and showed them what a reserve looks like, what street, and just educating people on stuff they might not be aware of.
Yeah, for sure. For me, just to wrap things up, I'd say a couple things. Courtney Baker's the GOAT. There's no denying that.
Yeah.
If you're young and a minority, and you're involved in sport, don't let what people say to you offend you or upset you. It's a lot of time it's a lack of education, and you need to understand that and just learn that once they see who you are as a person, they're going to love you and respect you. And, you know, some of the mothers that were the most skeptical of me as a coach, and I'm going to say mothers just because they're the ones we deal with the most, are also the ones that, you know, I'm still in touch with the most, right? So don't ever give up on yourself. And also just to you, Robbie, I'd just add, you know, you're someone who kind of, you know, when Tyler and I join in and we're playing provincial team, you gravitated towards us. So, you know, it's nice to have that person that, you know, Tyler and I obviously are going to gravitate towards each other because we're similar, but it's good to have that other person who's doesn't look quite like what you look like, and you've got their support because you feel a lot better about it, right? So, you know,
sure.
be that person that can make that change and just know that you can do that. That'd be my last piece.
Yeah, it was a good episode.
And the only reason why I'm wearing this hat is because my headphone keeps falling out. It's messing up the video.
So make sure to tune in, and the Howie Jackson Scholarship, we'll make sure we include that in there, and I encourage all young athletes to apply.
Yeah. Episode 5, that's a wrap.